Hello, I am Mabel Chan, and this is One in a Billion. Today, part 4 of our special series, LifeChangers, Time to Tell. In this series, we focus on Asian philanthropists who have built a lifetime of success on the backbone of adversity, on the shoulders of visionary, or with deep influence from family.
Both my parents were doctors. My father was a neurosurgeon, my mother a medical researcher.
That is the voice of Dr. Robin Yuan, a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills. Dr. Yuan was born in America and graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Medical School. But 2 years into his medical residency at UCLA, he was thrown out.
I was crying. I didn't know what to do. I was suddenly without a program. I felt like I had failed because to be actually cut and told that, oh, we don't want you in the program because you can become a plastic surgeon, was an emotional thing.
Why? What happened? And how did he later become a successful plastic surgeon, then went on to writing 4 books about his life, work, family, and running a philanthropy that supports documentaries to change negative perception of Chinese people? Here is our conversation. You are a plastic surgeon with 2 degrees from Harvard, a medical degree. What was your undergraduate in?
I graduated with a degree in biology.
You already knew very early on you wanted to become a doctor.
Yeah, because by default, because both my parents were doctors. My father was a neurosurgeon. My mother graduated from medical school and became a medical researcher. So at least for me, I didn't know anything else. We didn't talk business at all.
Oh, come on. I'm sure you know many other things. You were just not a rebellious kid.
As a 10-year-old kid, I wanted to be the first Chinese baseball player, Chinese professional baseball player. But obviously I wasn't good enough. And that was sort of a pie in the sky, a little boy's dream. But as I grew up and you sort of expect to go to college, I didn't think about becoming an attorney. That was very foreign to me. Engineering was kind of foreign. Being around my father, I had gone into the hospital many times with him as a kid, would watch him do surgery, would follow him around doing rounds.
Wow.
And I would see my mother doing, research in a lab. And so being around that sort of medical environment, it seemed like a natural thing to be a doctor. And I also distinctly remember that by being a doctor, you can become almost anything, but you can't do it the other way around. If you're a doctor, you can become a politician, you can become a businessman, you can become a philanthropist.
Yeah.
But you can't be a businessman and just start practicing medicine. The medicine is a good stepping stone to other endeavors.
How long have you been a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills? Has it been smooth sailing from the get-go because of your Harvard credentials?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, not necessarily for my Harvard credentials. I remember going from high school to Harvard College. I graduated when I was 19, went to medical school, became a doctor when I was 23, went to residency in UCLA in general surgery, and eventually became plastic surgeon. In that process, I was putting one foot in front of the other. It was sort of a natural transition from one educational level to another. It really didn't impact me that, I was making this huge leap or anything. It was just sort of very natural. So I don't think I really struggled.
But soon, Dr. Yuan would face the worst nightmare of his young life.
In my second year of general surgery residency at UCLA, that really was the most emotional, traumatic part of my life up to then. I was in this general surgery program, a 5-year program, which turned into a 7-year program because the chief of the department wanted to train very academic surgeons. And so we needed to do 2 years in the lab, then another 2 years doing plastic surgery. That's 9 years before I would get out and practice. That sort of threw me. But at the same time, I didn't know anything else to do it. So at the end of the second year, or towards the end, you have to declare a specialty. So a lot of times general surgeons will go into orthopedics, into urology, and I declared I wanted to be a plastic surgeon.
Why?
That was during my 3rd year in medical school when I took a 2-week rotation in plastic surgery at the Children's Hospital and the Peter Ben Brigham. And I didn't know anything about plastic surgery. So I figured, okay, I want to figure out what this specialty is all about. Well, I spent 2 weeks with Dr. Joseph Murray, and I soon realized that plastic surgeons thought and practiced very differently than any other surgical specialty. Plastic surgeons really had this free-form creative method of thinking. In other specialties, you learn how to do a procedure. You learn how to do a certain technique of hernia. You learn how to do a mastectomy, the A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's how you do that, the procedure. In plastic surgery, you have to make up things. It's very free-form. You have a problem, you have a deformity, you have a wound, and you have to figure out how to cure that problem or how to make, things better. And so sometimes you have to invent operations on the spot. And so that sort of creativity was very attractive to me. So I decided to go into plastic surgery.
But Dr. Yuan would have to pay a price for his decision.
Everybody knew that he didn't like plastic surgery. The chief of the department looked down on them because they did cosmetic surgery and they weren't rigorous.
Yeah.
Myself and another resident say we're going to be plastic surgery, and we got cut. We got thrown out of the program. I was crying. I didn't know what to do. I was suddenly without a program.
Oh.
I felt like I had failed. To be actually cut and told that, we don't want you in the program because you can become a plastic surgeon, was an emotional thing. I can remember crying to my sister on the phone.
And then what happened?
Well, everything worked out. I went to Cedars, and the chief there accepted me.
But guess what? After 1 year at Cedars, Dr. Yuan wanted out.
I told the chief at Cedars that I wanted to have a leave of absence from the program because I was burnt out. I'd gone through college in 3 years, went through medical school, working nonstop.
How old were you then?
I was probably 25.
Oh my.
Yeah, I felt...
Your brain was fried.
Yeah, well, not only that, but I was stunted in my creativity. I played music, wrote poems, I went to plastic surgery trying to be creative. The surgical residencies were all by rote, but you have to do things very strictly, like the Army. There was really no creativity, and I needed that. I told my chief I want to take a leave of absence, and I quit medicine.
Imagine, in the middle of medical residency, Dr. Yuan took off.
People thought I was crazy. I needed to recharge myself. And the thing that really motivated me to do that was hanging around young would-be actors and actresses in Hollywood. A lot of these waiters, waitresses, people you meet are aspiring actors and actresses and directors.
Right.
They had such a passion for what they did. They would work in any job just so they can act. And I realized, wow, here I am training to be a surgeon, which a lot of people would kill to be in these programs.
Right.
And I'm not happy. I don't have that drive. I don't have that passion. So I said, I better get out.
How did you reclaim or restore the passion?
I knew I wanted to be a surgeon. I love plastic surgery. I was having this sort of temporary block on my path.
During those 2 years off, Dr. Yuan wrote screenplays, taught tennis, and played music. He even went to China in 1983 trying to do a documentary. Even though his creative endeavors were not immediately fruitful, they would plant the seed for his philanthropic funding focus almost 40 years later. We'll tell you more about that a bit later in this podcast. But first, here's the good news for Dr. Yuan. His 2-year break did not break his career.
The good thing is that my chief said, okay, I understand. I'll take you back when you're ready to come back.
So Dr. Yuan went back to Cedars for his 4th-year residency. During his plastic surgery residency in Miami in the late 1980s, he began going on reconstructive missions in the developing world, first to Central America, next to Asia.
Went to the Philippines, and then I started to go to China. I went to China maybe 6 times and traveled around the country.
Offering free service as a surgeon.
Yeah, China at that time, late 80s, very basic in terms of plastic surgery. There weren't really any plastic surgeons per se. A lot of the cleft lips were done by stomatologists or oral surgeons.
Right.
So I went there and did surgery in different places, mainly reconstruction. So I was showing them techniques. did some lecturing. All that was fun and exciting because China was sort of a new frontier.
How were you received? Were you welcome?
At that point in time, doctors especially were hungry for knowledge and hungry for Western ideas and thoughts. And I was helped a lot because I went with this Dr. Millard, and he was like a god. It was amazing. And all these people would crowd around him listening to his every word. So some of that sort of adulation or respect fell to me just by being in his shadow.
Is there a philanthropic or public service background in your childhood?
When you asked me to speak, I said, well, I'm really not a philanthropist. We think of Bill Gates giving millions of dollars. So am I a philanthropist? And so I looked up the word, and philanthropy, is a Latin root of philo, meaning love, and anthros, humans or mankind. And so it's really the love of mankind.
Yes.
It has less to do with money, financial giving, and more sort of what comes out of your love for your fellow man. And I think that's what I felt early on, sort of wanting to help other people, wanting to assist them, wanting to teach them. One of the things I did in high school, I started a tutoring program. So I would help organize a group of better students to help the less advanced students. One Easter, my junior year in high school, I baked cookies. I had this tin full of cookies, and I took the tea to Boston Common, and I walked around and gave random strangers a cookie. Obviously, it was just sort of a human gesture that made me feel good. And then in college, I started a group gathering student performers, magicians, jugglers, pianists, dancers, and I brought them into nursing homes. And so they would perform at all these different nursing homes, and I would go with them. And it was really amazing because the residents of these nursing homes, they're sort of cooped up there. They don't have a lot of social interaction. So whenever they had these performers, these students come in, it was like they were greeting the Pope. All these little gestures made me feel good.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Quincy, the lower middle class working neighborhood at the time, and then moved to Newton, which is more of a middle upper class professional town.
In Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts, yes. These were all suburbs of Boston. And speaking with my father later on as to why Newton, he said, well, he looked at all the towns and schools around the Boston area, and Newton sent the most kids to Harvard. So I didn't realize that he had sort of targeted Harvard for his kids very early on. My parents were very supportive, helpful, and giving to others. And it was very obvious to me early on that they were very selfless in some respects. They were supportive in the church and in Chinese organizations, but I don't think they looked at it as giving money away, more sort of service and support. I think that's sort of implanted in my brain and my being fairly early on.
It sounds like you have a background growing up watching your parents in church service, and they value education.
My parents both grew up in Christian households and went to Christian mission schools back in China. This environment of Christian principles and belief and practices went to the best mission schools, St. John's of Jingling. So Christianity and education were primary elements in their growing up. And I think that they brought that to us. My father's grandfather was the first Chinese or consecrated bishop in the Anglican Church in the early 1900s, I believe 1918. And my father was orphaned by age 5, so he was brought up by his grandfather. My mother grew up in a Christian household, even though her father was Confucian, and he converted to Christianity after he was sent to mission school in Wuhu. He became presiding bishop of the Anglican Church at the time that Mao took over.
Chairman Mao took over the reins of China at a time of war after war. The Cultural Revolution under his leadership was ruthless in persecuting Western and bourgeois elements, including torturing and jailing Christians. Dr. Yuan's grandfather, Bishop Robin Chen, died trying to stay true to his Christian faith and his mission to help China through the church. Dr. Yuan wrote about him in The Red Bishop, the latest of his 4 books. The Red Bishop is historical fiction that Dr. Yuan hoped would honor the emotional truth and religious devotion of a man he had never met, but admired greatly.
I imagined his conversion to Christianity, and based on what I knew about the general history of Chinese people converting and what was happening at that time. So I created this scenario where he was sent to mission school to study English. I knew that occurred because that was written someplace that his father wanted him to learn English because English was becoming so prevalent with the foreigners sort of dominating China. So that tied into the history of China. He had really taken to the principles of Christianity and saw what the church was doing could help Chinese people. I got the sense that he was very vested in helping China and the Chinese people, and he saw the church as a vehicle for doing that.
Now, Dr. Robin Yuan wants to become a vehicle for helping China and the Chinese people as well through philanthropy. A few years ago, he became the president of a philanthropic organization called the Phi Lambda Charitable Trust.
The Phi Lambda was formed in 1919 by Chinese students at Columbia who were from China and formed this fraternity. Over the years, it morphed into a co-ed organization 40 years ago. Not many members needed assistance because most of them were professional engineers, doctors, professors. They didn't really need financial assistance. And so then this charitable trust was formed.
Can you name a project or two recently that you did through Phi Lambda that really serves the mission?
GBH and their World Channel were developing a number of different documentaries, and they had asked us initially for a fairly large grant. I looked at the projects they were involved in and chose 3 films about Chinatowns and decided, okay, we'll give them finishing funds.
GBH is the PBS flagship station in Massachusetts, Dr. Yuan's home state. You can see the roots of his current philanthropic passion can be traced to his early interests in producing documentary in China.
The new missions of the trust is to bring some of the social concerns of Chinese people to non-Chinese, to increase awareness. Another documentary is looking at the post-World War II Chinese immigrants, of which my parents were part. So these were well-educated professional students who came to the U.S. and then got stuck here because of the communist takeover. They were the group that mostly populated the suburbs and became doctors, engineers, and professors. They weren't the Chinatown group of Chinese immigrants
That we know of today.
Yeah, we have a documentary being developed on that. And then another documentary called I Am Chinese, I Am American, which counteracts the anti-Asian, anti-Chinese hate and violence that has cropped up over the last few years. So basically trying to show that we Chinese are also American.
What is your personal takeaway, Robin, when you fund these projects on behalf of your philanthropic mission? When you watch a documentary, when you produce these video, what moved you?
My personal perspective is that the story about Chinese, about China, Chinese Americans need to be told to the non-Chinese audience. We have to let the non-Chinese people know about us. That was even more evident in the last few years, not only with the Chinese hate where Asians were looked upon as non-Americans, that we were foreigners, that we didn't belong here, that we were somehow inferior. And I hate to say this, but a lot of Americans are fairly ignorant about China and Chinese people. They have a stereotypical point of view or old world type of view from the 1950s, Chinese being communists invading, Americans. And it became very evident that a lot of the discourse and discussions regarding Chinese people, China, geopolitics, came from a place of ignorance.
What is the biggest misperception that you want to correct through any of the documentary projects that you have supported?
To humanize Chinese people, there is a subsect of people who look at Chinese as, sort of dirty or animals or barbarians or we eat dogs and things like that. Very ignorant perception. That might be a small minority. Over the last few years, it was very vocal and visible part of society. So I think just showing the humanity that Chinese people have, that we come from various backgrounds. If you look at a lot of the history, both individual and as a country, and see how a Chinese student coming from rural China can become so successful in the United States, or you look at China as a country so backwards after the Cultural Revolution and where they are now. And if you really look at it and study it and absorb it, I think you would have great respect or more respect for Chinese people in China. You don't have to agree with the politics, but just to have a awareness and respect of that history is valuable and necessary. Not only Chinese, but across all races and ethnicities. There's a commonality in human experience that the one may not be sensitive to or aware of.
What is the power in documentary in moving the needle, in informing and illuminating history and bonding us as human beings?
I like documentaries because it's real life. Once you absorb the subject matter and you get into it and you realize these things were not made up. You see that Chinatowns are being taken over by local developers. These are real people being pushed out of their neighborhood and their history is being covered up and buried. And you realize that, these are impacting real families. These are real sentiments, human experiences. So I think that's very impactful.
You describe very well the power of reality, how people are actually getting evicted or excluded, pushed out. Well, let me ask you, you have given to the cause of promoting the positive image of Chinese people over the years. Have you seen any progress? And how do you measure impact?
Our support of documentaries is quite recent, so I don't think we know the answer to that. The only thing is, for instance, the Tale of Three Chinatowns is that a group expressed a need for funding, and we felt, okay, we can provide it and help their mission.
Before the current focus on funding documentaries, Dr. Yuan said Phi Lambda, the charitable trust that he runs, has also supported a wide range of life-changing projects over the last 40 years. Can you summarize maybe some of the key projects that Phi Lambda have supported over the years?
The initial projects really were only to send American-born Chinese students to Taiwan to their Chinese language summer program. Early 2000, we support schools in China. Maybe a dozen schools in poor provinces in China. We also supported college students from rural areas to go to college. 60 students have been given full scholarships for full years, so they've gone to many of the top universities. Built a couple of water wells for villages who don't have clean water. We support a food bank in Hong Kong. Since I took over, and because of the geopolitics between U.S. and China, the pandemic, and the difficulty in doing work in China, we decided to focus more on domestic projects. So we have supported Museum of Chinese Americans, MoCA, in New York, the Chinese Historical Museum in San Diego, Chesney, which is the Chinese Historical Society of New England, organizations like the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Community, which we've supported. And recently, we've helped the Garden of Hope organization in New York who gives support and after-school programs to abused children. So we sent a number of them to a summer music program. So it's sort of a diverse project hitting on different aspects of need in the Chinese community.
When you think about that, Robin, I wonder whether you ever pull back and ask yourself, what matters most to you? What gives you this sort of high, the pride when you reflect on these projects?
me personally is to just get the members and our charitable trust behind this idea of doing as much as we can to support our mission. So every project that we support, we can help some people or organization. That gives me a sense of satisfaction as the president of this organization. When you think about philanthropy, a lot of times you think, I'm not rich. What can I do? People tend to maybe be hindered by the fact that what they give is so small relative to what they perceive as a philanthropist. But it's more about if you can just do it. You're better off trying to do something than to just sit around and do nothing.
Right.
Contribute whatever you can, because you don't need to be Bill Gates to help people.
So true. Who needs to be Bill Gates? We can all do something to help someone. Thank you, Dr. Robin Yuan. In our next episode,
I have a black belt in Taekwondo. All through college, I actually earned all my pocket money by teaching women self-defense. I was a terrible businesswoman because I realized early on the women who could least afford to take my self-defense classes were the ones that needed it the most.
That is Kyun Yoon, president of the Korean American Community Foundation in New York, a television journalist, public speaker, and philanthropist. Stay tuned for that on the last Friday of December. One in a Billion LifeChangers special series is made possible by our corporate sponsor, Claudia Lin, founder and CEO of Legacy Maker LLC, an investment advisory company with a holistic approach to investing and managing your asset. One in a Billion is produced by our sound engineer and designer, Brian Latinowich, and our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, or pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.